All right, everybody, welcome in. Justin Kinner with you live here at Dayton's ESPN Radio 1410 Wing AM. Happy Thursday. A lot to dive into here today. Joe Burrow has been a busy man at Media Row at the Super Bowl. Joe Burrow against the front office. It's not WrestleMania. Well, it's WrestleMania season, but it sounds like the main event. You know, I think there's 2 nights of WrestleMania. I think the first night will be Myles Garrett against the Browns front office, and it looks like it's about to be Joe Burrow against the Bengals front office. But Joe Burrow seems to be on a warpath. He seems to be on a mission, trying to get something done, and I think it's no secret what he wants done. But will it get done? Will the front office deliver? That's what we're going to talk about here today as we open things up. Again, Justin Kinner with you here, Dayton's ESPN Radio 1410 Wing AM. Back in studio today. I was on the road yesterday. Last 2 days with Wright State. They had a matchup with Fort Wayne last night. Not pretty. Did not go well. But they'll be back in action at home. Coming up this Saturday night, IU Indy. It'll be the homecoming game. Excited for the Raiders to get back at home. But that was not a pretty matchup last night. Purdue Fort Wayne, a very, very good team, arguably the best team in that conference. And they beat Wright State in double overtime a few weeks ago. They punched Wright State in the mouth last night. We'll see if they can get it together by Saturday with IU Indy coming to town. The Myles Garrett situation in Cleveland, we're going to jump in that. The Cleveland Cavaliers are legitimate NBA championship contenders. I don't know if we've ever said that. At least in my lifetime, I know we have not said that without a LeBron James being on the roster. I think that is so unique, and I think it would be the most interesting championship. It would be the most important championship in Cleveland if they were able to get that done without LeBron. And we'll talk about that more coming up here in just a bit. What else? Oh, yeah, Ohio State news, coaching staff updates. A lot has happened over the last week. Ryan Day gets a contract extension. Now the second highest paid coach behind Kirby Smart, makes more than Dabo Swinney, who has multiple national championships. So we'll talk about what that means for Ohio State expectations and all that fun stuff moving forward. But let's talk about Joe Burrow. Let's talk about the Cincinnati Bengals. Right now, I think we can all agree that the Cincinnati Bengals have a lot of holes that they need to fill. Now, I think where we start to disagree on a lot of stuff is the urgency and the prioritization of how to attack some of these needs that the Bengals have. Joe Burrow started, I think it was after the Dallas Cowboys win on Monday Night Football about a month and some change ago. Or 2 months ago, I guess it was a minute. It's February. Wow. He started really pressing the T. Higgins conversation, referring to T. Higgins, saying that he is a need, that the Bengals need T. Higgins. I don't want to repeat the segment I've done in the past. I don't think the Bengals need T. Higgins. I think you want T. Higgins. I think it's kind of rich to have a quarterback that has the most dominant receiver in football, in Jamar Chase, spending all of this time talking about how much he needs a second number one wide receiver. I just find that very odd. I find that very, very odd because I'm sure, Josh Allen, watching what he did this year without a true number one wide receiver, watching what Patrick Mahomes does without a true number one wide receiver. I find that odd that a quarterback as good as Joe Burrow needs a second number one wide receiver. But to Joe Burrow's credit, he wants it, and he's doing everything that he can to get it done. The Cincinnati Bengals are in a very weird situation. Joe Burrow was taken care of a couple off seasons ago. He got his money. And then you have Jamar Chase. We knew that Jamar Chase would be next in line to get taken care of. And those talks, I guess, started last offseason. They weren't able to get anything done. It led to the distraction during camp. He sat out most of camp. It was kind of like a sit-in. Ultimately, plays week 1 against the Patriots. It didn't go well, and you can argue that the Patriots game is ultimately what cost them a playoff berth. So that's the drama that the Bengals are going to be facing, is getting that deal done with Jamar Chase. T. Higgins demanded a trade last year, ultimately took the trade request off the table to decide he didn't want to be a distraction, accepted the $22.5 million on the franchise tag, played very well, and has now put the Bengals in a situation where we thought we had seen the last of T. Higgins in Cincinnati, but apparently, according to reports today, that may not be the case. The Bengals may actually pull the trigger on getting a deal done, but Joe Burrow is pleading and begging to get it done. Trey Hendrickson, candidate for Defensive Player of the Year, of course. All right, been one of the best pass rushers in football for years now. And in a situation right now where he goes on, the Pat McAfee show yesterday and is basically throwing it out there that, hey, you either need to give me an extension or you need to trade me, but he wants it done soon. He's willing to help the Bengals. He talked about the importance of wanting to help the Bengals win the Super Bowl, whether that be on the roster or helping them win the Super Bowl by bringing assets to the team in a trade. I thought it was a very creative, passive-aggressive way of telling the Bengals to crap or get off the pot. Basically, either trade me, or either sign me, give me an extension, or trade me. There's no need to have this long negotiation. Here's what I want. Give it to me. If not, get me out of here. It's as simple as that. But the big questions keep popping up for the Bengals. Your defense was so bad last year. Why would you not do everything in your power to get Trey Hendrickson taken care of? You can also say, well, the defense was so bad last year, even with Trey Hendrickson, so why would we need to get a deal done? We should just start from scratch, all right, and count on the player development angle that you brought Al Golden in for, and hope that you hit on some draft picks this upcoming draft, of course. The defense is going to take time to turn around. The bottom line is Joe Burrow, we all know what he wants. Joe Burrow, he wants the Cincinnati Bengals to extend Trey Hendrickson. He wants the Cincinnati Bengals to take care of T. Higgins, to make sure Jamar Chase gets taken care of. Joe Burrow went on a media tour today and let his opinions be known about this exact layout of how he wants this offseason to go. Take a listen. This was Joe Burrow on ESPN's First Take earlier today when he was asked, does he have faith in the front office's ability and capability to get these guys taken care of? Take a listen.
That ownership, you confident that they're going to be willing to keep all of those guys?
The cap is going up each year. We just got new TV deals. You go up.
TV money. Yep.
And we all want to stay together, so we're all going to do what it takes to do that. And we have great players that have done great things and deserve to be paid. They're going to be paid what they're worth, whether we do it or somebody else. I hope we do it. I think, we've had the discussions that the guys are going to get paid that need to get paid. And so it's a big offseason for the Bengals.
You remember how that question started, Stephen A. Smith, one more time?
That ownership, you confident that they're going to be willing to keep all of those guys?
The cap is going up each year. We just got new TV deals. You go up.
TV money. Yep.
You notice he didn't answer? You confident that the Bengals are going to be able to get that done? The TV deals, the TV money coming in is more. You realize he sidestepped that? Joe Burrow, the whole reason he is doing this media tour is because he has zero faith in the Bengals front office to get this done. We talked about it on Off the Bench earlier today. I find this to be alarming. And if I'm a Bengals fan, I would be very concerned about why Joe Burrow is doing this. I see a lot of people falling for oh man, what a great leader. And by the way, I am here to tell you, he is being a good leader. He is. I'm not spinning it like that. Joe Burrow is doing nothing wrong. I actually find what he's doing to be pretty commendable. I mean, he's going on national TV and doing as many of these national hits as possible, knowing that if that groundswell of support from the fans and the pressure that puts on the front office to give Joe Burrow what he wants, I think this is actually very smart. He's going to bat for the fans because what the fans want is to keep that core together because it gives them the best chance to win. He's being a good leader for his teammates. He's wanting to make sure that not only do they get contract extension offers, but that they are being paid what they are worth. He's going to bat for his team. I appreciate what he's doing. However, as a Bengals fan, if I'm reading the tea leaves, if you will, I'd be very concerned about how all of this is playing out. I would be very concerned about how all of this is playing out because Joe Burrow, when he says he's confident that this can get done, I don't believe him. When he says that, well, actually, he never says that he thinks that they're capable of getting it done. Stephen A. Smith asked him, and he totally sidestepped the question. Joe Burrow, are you confident that they can get it done? He didn't answer. He didn't answer. One more time.
That ownership, you confident that they're going to be willing to keep all of those guys?
The cap is going up each year. We just got new TV
Joe Burrow,
deals.
I don't think that was the question. I don't think anybody said, hey, what's your thoughts on the TV deal? He said, do you think that they're capable of keeping everyone together? He didn't give a yes. He didn't give a no. He just totally sidestepped the question. It's an easy question. Yes or no. And he couldn't say yes. Joe Burrow does not trust his front office. It's very obvious. I think it's obvious. People are saying, man, he's using this, this media tour right now at Radio Row to get a point across. He's been trying to get his point across since the Dallas Cowboys game, months ago. We started this debate about whether T. Higgins, is he truly a need or not months ago, because Joe Burrow all of a sudden out of nowhere started really hammering it home to the media how much of a need T. Higgins is. And I think that Joe Burrow does not have any faith or confidence whatsoever that the front office is going to do this. And the best way, to increase the probability of it getting done is to create that groundswell of support and pressure from the fan base on that front office and just hope that they are listening and get it done. Because if Joe Burrow said he felt confident that the front office can get it done, he wouldn't feel the need to have to go and do all these shows and really put the pressure on the front office. Right? Like Josh Allen's not doing media hits pleading with his front office to go get weapons. Patrick Mahomes never has to do that. Right? Lamar Jackson's not doing media hits saying, man, please get me a Derrick Henry. Please get me this. Please get me that. Joe Burrow's the only one doing that. He's the only quarterback that is going show to show and pleading and begging his front office to do the right thing. Obviously take care of Jamar Chase, pay, T. Higgins, pay Hendrickson. If I'm a Bengals fan, I'm very concerned because Joe Burrow, and we talked about this on Off the Bench. We're going to talk a lot about what he is saying, but if you think about the psychological side to it, why is he saying this? Why is he doing what he's doing? I think that it's alarming that he feels he has to do this. He feels he has to create that urgency and the pressure from the fan base to urge that front office to get it done. I would be concerned if I'm a Bengals fan. Now, the next part of this is, do they get it done? Bengals fans, I do want to hear from you. 937-518-1410. That's the number to call and jump in on the conversation. Do you agree? Should you be concerned? Are you concerned that your quarterback feels he has to go and beg and plead and create this pressure from the fans by going on this media tour? From my perspective, if Joe Burrow truly felt that he was confident that the front office would get it done, why would he have to go on all these shows and spend the entire time pleading with them to get it done? I think there's problems behind the scenes. I think there's a lack of trust between Joe Burrow and his front office. Do you agree? I'm not burying your quarterback. You may think I'm talking bad about your team, but I think it's a realistic question, and I would love to hear from you. 937-518-1410. Although it's cool to hear Joe Burrow be a leader and have your players' backs and his teammates' backs and your back as a fan, don't you think that's a red flag that there's something going on behind the scenes that we're just not aware of? To me, something's a-brewing. Something's wrong. Something's happening that has led Joe Burrow to act this way. He feels he needs to do this because he does not trust the front office to get a deal done. Do you agree? 937-518-1410. That's the call-in line. Give us a call. We'll discuss more when we come back. It's the Justin Kinner Show right here on 1410 ESPN Radio. All right, and we welcome you back. Justin Kenner with you here. Dayton's ESPN Radio, 1410 Wing AM, 937-518-1410. That's the number to call and jump in on the conversation. Thoughts on Joe Burrow's media tour today, just begging and pleading that front office to get a deal done, talking about, the fact that they have the cap space, all right, they have the resources to get it done, the importance of not letting good players leave the building. That's something that I've heard a lot of Bengals fans really harp on the importance of that. Like, how many more good players are we just going to continue to watch bring something to the table in Cincinnati and then just watch them walk right out the door? I think that is a fair criticism of the Bengals front office as far as that's concerned. Now, again, there's a lot of people like me that, again, to question whether you need to, spend $50 million a year on 2 wide receivers. I think that's a decision that I think that, people talk about, well, the Eagles do it. The Eagles are one of the most well-run organizations in football. They know how to do that. They know how to complement that with drafting really well. All right. They have a very good GM. The Bengals, I don't think, have the front office that's equipped to be able to handle enough big contracts like that. Not even stirring the pot. I just think it just comes down to the financial economics of it all to begin with. We did talk about it on Off the Bench earlier about the cash rich side for the not Castellini's, I'm so sorry, but for the Brown family. It's just, I don't know how that front office is all of a sudden magically just going to get it together. As I said earlier, I think it's a concern. People are so focused on what Joe Burrow is doing. I just keep questioning the why. Why would Joe Burrow have to do this? Why does Joe Burrow feel like he needs to go and do this media tour? I think it's because he doesn't trust his front office. By the way, we're live on the Justin Kidder Show Facebook page as well as the ESPN Dayton YouTube channel. Our ESPN Dayton YouTube channel is back up and running. So if you'd like to go back and watch the show on that platform, you are more than welcome to do so. We got that access to that back. So keep that in mind. But we are live on the Justin Kidder Show Facebook page as well. If you want to leave a comment in the comment section, I can interact with you that way. I see a couple of you on hold. We'll get to your calls coming up in a moment. But Ryan on Facebook says he knew this would be an issue when he signed his mega deal. Don't come back now and pretend you're all about keeping the team together. $70 million between 2 wide receivers, guessing Chase at 40 and T at 30 is, unattainable. It's not attainable. Maybe if you drafted well, like Philly and Kansas City, you can win on rookie deals. Yeah, I mean, look, Jamar Chase is going to touch that $40 million range. T. Higgins, at the cheapest you'd get him is $25 million. So, yeah, you're right. I said 50 earlier. I mean, we're talking 65 to 70 million a year in 2 wide receivers, plus your 55 million a year quarterback. I mean, yeah, that's 120 million wrapped up into those 3 players on one side of the ball. That's not even getting to the point to where we're questioning how are they going to bulk up that offensive line. Make sure that the run get, because once again, one of the worst run teams in football. That's been a constant. How do you improve that? Again, the cap is what, 240, 250. So you subtract that 120. You know what I mean? Like, now all of a sudden you're dealing. So now you have 120 million to form the rest of the roster. And that's with having to pay Trey Hendrickson. That's with having to pay, more, guys on the defensive side of the ball. Yikes. I don't see how this gets done. Everyone's confident it's going to get done. By the way, I do not blame Joe Burrow for that contract. Okay, I don't blame Joe Burrow for taking that contract. He deserved that $55 million. What I don't like about what Joe Burrow was doing and saying is, I know today he said he's willing to restructure his contract. Players restructure contracts all the time. They roll it over to get the signing bonus. I mean, you're not doing anything special. You're just getting your money up front as opposed to being sprinkled throughout the season. It makes a lot of sense. I don't blame Joe Burrow at all for taking all the money that he did. It's up to the front office to figure the rest out. So I'm not going to blame Joe Burrow, but Joe Burrow does need to stop saying, yeah, we're willing to do, we know what we need to do to make this to happen. Well, is this what you need to do? Go on every single media show possible and scream it out loud to the fans so that the pressure goes on the front office so that they end up paying these guys what they're worth. They should pay them what they're worth. But it's not Joe Burrow's responsibility to shave money off to go take care of the guy over there. However, I would have a problem if T. Higgins took less money to play with Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase when Jamar Chase takes every dollar coming to him and Joe Burrow took every dollar coming to him as well. I think that would be a bad look at the end of the day. But yeah, Cincinnati, they got a lot of question marks. They have a lot of decisions to make this offseason. And here's one other counterpoint for all of this. I think the Cincinnati Bengals are working extremely hard to keep the core together that wasn't good enough to make the playoffs. Now, people keep saying, well, if you don't have T. Higgins, then who are you going to throw the ball to? T. Higgins at $25 million a year, you could still get very good pass catch. And by the way, Joe Burrow is paid to elevate lesser receivers. I think that's for Joe Burrow to figure out and the front office to figure out. I don't think you need a second wide receiver making 25 to 30 million along with Jamar Chase. I think that's very difficult. Who you take T. Higgins off the roster? I heard Hushman Zada say this 2 days ago. If you take T. Higgins off this roster, who else is he throwing the ball to? Well, that guy may not be on the roster yet. You move on from T. Higgins, you go get a second, you go get his replacement. You're just going to go get a cheaper option. Well, he won't be as good as T. Higgins. Boo-hoo. Josh Allen doesn't even have one guy as good as T. Higgins. Oh, well. Like, it's Joe Burrow's responsibility to elevate talent around him. I've thrown this out there before. I'm not trying to be too critical here, but I'm just questioning things. Who is a talent that Joe Burrow has elevated? I watched Josh Allen elevate wide receivers. I'm watching Patrick Mahomes win Super Bowls with lesser than wide receivers. Like, I'm just saying, who has Joe Burrow made better? So, oh man, if you take T. Higgins off, who's he going to throw the football to? I don't know. The guy's probably not on the roster yet. But I guarantee you, for the price of T. Higgins, you could probably go get two really good wide receivers to have a number one wide receiver and a 2 and a 3, as opposed to just having a $70 million tandem at wide receiver. I don't buy into the T. Higgins thing. I just don't. I really don't. As far as Trey Hendrickson's concerned, you need a pass catcher. I will say this. It's hard to find elite players at every position. I get that. But it's even harder to find an elite pass rusher like Trey Hendrickson. I think he is more valuable to this Bengals team than T. Higgins. I mean, I really think that, like, I would think it would be absolutely insane to let Trey Hendrickson go. You have to keep Trey Hendrickson. And if you lose Trey Hendrickson because you had to spend $70 million on 2 wide receivers because Joe Burrow's not confident that he could win with anybody else, that's insane. I think that would be a bad decision on the Bengals. And I know it's going to happen. They're going to cave, most likely, and pay T. Higgins. Joe Burrow's going to get what he wants. And then when the team who allocated all the funds to 2 wide receivers gives $70 million this offseason to 2 wide receivers, and then they take care of Trey Hendrickson, and then they don't take care of others because they don't have any more money, then we're going to be saying Joe Burrow's going to be throwing a temper tantrum next year saying, we're just not good enough defensively. Well, maybe the $25 million that went to a second number 1 wide receiver could have been redistributed throughout the defense, and that's the most important talking point. I don't get it. David Mann says, even with the salary cap said to be rising again this offseason and for the foreseeable future, every offseason the Bengals would be insane to pay all 3 and ignore a bad defense beyond Hendrickson and an O-line that still isn't stable. I hope they do it. Go Niners. We got our own roster puzzle to complete. Yeah, you and me both, David. He's a Niners fan. I'm a Browns fan. I say not so proudly at the exact moment. They have their own chaos that they're trying to navigate towards. All I know is last year the Bengals offseason was boring. I love that it's not boring this year. Last year the Browns offseason was boring. I love that it's not boring this year. They have so many question marks heading into the draft, so many question marks heading into free agency, both the Bengals and the Browns. And the Bengals and Browns both have so many question marks as far as not just future players like the draft, players in the draft and free agency, taking care of the guys on their current roster right now. So Alex Yearley says Burrow has to overcome the play calling of Zach Taylor. Mahomes and Allen love great play callers and Nagy and Brady. The greatness of Higgins and Chase overcome Taylor. I disagree, Alex. If that's the case, then Joe Burrow is to blame for Zach Taylor being there. Star players all the time, they know when they have a coach that is not putting them in position to succeed, they get them out of there. So every time, Joe Burrow said it multiple times today, loves playing for Zach Taylor, loves playing in that offense. What is he overcoming? A guy that when this roster was healthy and had a defense, Zach Taylor led them to back-to-back AFC championship games and almost within a play of winning a Super Bowl. We got to stop blaming. We got to stop blaming Zach Taylor for stuff. Zach Taylor's a good football coach. Zach Taylor is not why their defense was bad last year. If they had a good defense last year, they're winning football games. They're in the playoffs and competing with the Chiefs. What are we doing? Alex Yearley says 100% without Burrow, there is no Zach Taylor. You're going out on a limb there. Without any quarterback, a coach is not a coach. I don't know. You guys with the obsession with Zach Taylor is just insane. Andy Reid is Andy Reid because he had Donovan McNabb. Andy Reid is Andy Reid because he has Patrick Mahomes. Bill Belichick was Bill Belichick because he had Tom Brady. And guess what? Tom Brady went away. Bill Belichick, all of a sudden, it looked like the NFL passed him by. Nope. He just didn't have a quarterback in New England, because if there was another elite quarterback, if the Patriots were like the Packers, where you go from one elite quarterback to the next seamlessly, he's still in the NFL winning football games for the New England Patriots. It's as simple as that. We got to, I think it's lazy to continue blaming Zach Taylor for everything. I really do. Joe Burrow has to overcome Zach Taylor. Yes, Joe Burrow has to overcome this offense that he threw for 4,800 yards and 40 touchdowns in. What are we doing? Joe Burrow has to overcome his offensive head coach and Zach Taylor, who the Bengals are one of the best offensive teams in football year in and year out. What are we overcoming? What roadblocks exist for Joe Burrow in this offense? I'll wait. We got to, I think that's, man, Zach Taylor. We're still doing that? I didn't know we were still doing that. By the way, do I think Zach Taylor is an elite head coach? I think we're talking about Zach Taylor in a completely different light. If their defense was good last year, that front office chose not to bolster that defense, not Zach Taylor. That front office decided not to financially invest into that defense, not Zach Taylor. When that defense plays well, Zach Taylor has them in back-to-back AFC championship games. That's Zach Taylor. Ryan says blaming the coach is such an Ohio thing to do. It really is, because watch the Bengals win the Super Bowl next year, and everyone's going to be talking about how underrated Zach Taylor is and blah, 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 blah. It's nauseating hearing people still blame Zach Taylor or talk about how Joe Burrow has to overcome Zach Taylor. Here's the deal. I think Zach Taylor, his responsibilities on the offensive side, that's what he is elite at. Being a head coach, maybe being the CEO of everything, not so much. We saw that with Ryan Day. Ryan Day, very, very good, offensive mind. He needed to be the CEO. He gave up play calling responsibilities, and then look what happened. He was able to navigate through this entire college football season and win a national championship. I can't believe we're still doing this. I mean, this overcoming stuff. Like poor Joe Burrow, who has T. Higgins and Jamar Chase and Mike Gesicki. And we saw the run game improve as the season went on. And we're talking about poor Joe Burrow. He just doesn't have enough help on the offensive side of the ball. What Joe Burrow doesn't have is a defense, which is what the prioritization of the financial funds that they have should be on this offseason. Not, what do we got to do to keep T. Higgins? You need a defense. We need T. Higgins because we need to put 30 points up because the defense doesn't stop anybody. Maybe if you don't re-sign T. Higgins and you financially invest into your defense, then you wouldn't have to score 35 points a game to win, because now you could just be a very good, efficient offense. By the way, the Kansas City Chiefs didn't score over 30 all season until the playoffs, and they went 15-2. And why? Because they're a balanced football team. The Bengals need to be focusing on being a balanced football team and not, let's just get Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, Joe Burrow, and hopefully our rookies pan out on defense. That's a recipe for disaster. I don't know. Ron Howard says, even if they sign T, he doesn't play defense. Yes, the defense is the number one issue. I think we're spending way too much time on T. Higgins. The defense is why they didn't make the playoffs last year. The defense is what let them down. By the way, this was a team that we were talking a year ago about being good enough to win a Super Bowl. And now the team wasn't even good enough to make the playoffs, much less come up short in the playoffs or come up short in the Super Bowl. Why? Because of the defense. The defense has to be the number one priority this offseason. Extend Trey Hendrickson, keep him happy, get a dominant pass rusher to play on the opposite side of him. All right. Make sure you're getting younger and more athletic in the secondary. and then, of course, hit on your draft picks and let Al Golden go to work. That's how you quickly turn this around if you're the Cincinnati Bengals. But financially, putting all your eggs and taking $120 million a year and giving it to 3 players on one side of the ball with a bad offensive line, with one of the worst run games in football, with one of the worst defenses in football, worst pass rushers in football, worst secondaries in football. My goodness. How are we at the point now where we are literally saying T. Higgins has to be at the top of our prioritization list? I can't get on board with that. Steve Stetler says, in fairness, Zach Taylor has a sub 500 record with all that talent. Why do they always start terribly? Food for thought. Why does Joe Burrow never get blamed for why they start out so slow? I agree with you, by the way. Zach Taylor is responsible for the slow starts, but Joe Burrow, it's not like Joe Burrow's playing great every September. Joe Burrow's not a good quarterback every September. No, if it's because of injuries or whatever, it doesn't matter. Joe Burrow's inability to be ready in September is why this team starts out slow. And that's the other thing. I think we also overcomplicate this. I think it's pretty easy. People are just afraid to say it. Joe Burrow is why the slow starts come every year. Joe Burrow he hasn't been healthy in off season, so he doesn't participate in this past year was the first full preseason. We're heading into year 6 with Joe Burrow. That was the first time he ever made it through an entire preseason without having a little boo-boo. He's always banged up and injured and always resting some injury or rehabbing some injury. Well, I don't get what could Zach Taylor do to make sure this team's ready? I don't know. How about Joe Burrow just be readily available? Joe Burrow was healthy and still wasn't ready to go in week 1. He kept saying the wrist was 100%. Everything was golden, good to go. Then all of a sudden they get off to a couple, the slow start in September, and all of a sudden he's flicking the wrist. He's rolling that wrist. All of a sudden it's the wrist. But he's playing well. That wrist is fine. I always compared it to Tiger Woods. Tiger Woods, when he was golfing well, no talk of his back. His back was always fine. But, man, the second he had a bad round, all of a sudden, oh, my back. I think we just need to stop. This isn't some riddle that's tough to figure out. Why are the Bengals not ready to play every September? It's Joe Burrow who's not ready to play every September. And you may think I'm saying that in a way that I'm blaming him. I'm stating facts. He's never ready in September. He's always coming off of an injury, rehabbing an injury, trying to get into football shape that you can't replicate in the preseason. And for those of you who say, well, play him more in the preseason. Yes, because that 1 or 2 possessions in the first quarter of a preseason game, that's the difference between 3-1 or 4-0 September and the crap that we've seen from Zach and everybody else throughout this reign. If Joe Burrow is ready to go week 1, the Bengals are ready to go week 1. Joe Burrow all of a sudden flipped a switch, 6-7 weeks. For whatever reason, Joe Burrow week 7 on is an MVP quarterback. Every single year. Never fails. But you can't light your house on fire and then expect to get credit for putting that fire out. Joe Burrow, stay healthy, have a good camp, and be ready to go in week 1. I don't think because next year I have a feeling the Bengals are going to play really well week 1. They're going to get a week 1 win. Joe Burrow's going to be great. He's going to have an MVP season next year. And people are going to be like, well, what did Zach Taylor do differently to have the team ready this year? He's not going to do anything differently. It's just that your unreliable offseason quarterback has been all of a sudden available for the first time in week 1. It's as simple as that. People are just afraid to say it because you can't question Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow just needs to be available and healthy in week 1. It's as simple as that. Doug Toby says, yeah, we also blame Ryan Day for a national championship. He put together one heck of a team and staff. He was a horrible coach by the Ohio fan base in November. I mean, Doug, he was underachieving in November. I mean, both things can be true. Ryan Day was underachieving as head coach in November and then did what he was supposed to and won 4 games to win a national championship. That's an argument for later. But Doug, hope you're doing well. Ron Howard says they need to let Higgins walk and try to get Myles Garrett. At least you're spending on defense. The Bengals, they don't make big trades. All right. They don't restructure contracts. They don't hit home runs in free agency. And they're not aggressive at the draft. They don't trade up. They don't try, you know what I mean? They don't move up to get their guy. They just, hopefully that guy that we like is there when we get there. The Bengals are the most unaggressive team in football. The most aggressive decision that they made during the Joe Burrow era was ignoring the noise, and I was part of the noise during the Penei Sewell, Jamar Chase debate. I thought taking a wide receiver top 5 in the draft when you had a historically bad offensive line and all those needs, I thought taking Jamar Chase, that was a bad decision at the time because of all the needs you had. Ended up being the best decision they ever made. And guess what? It was because they were aggressive with their decision making at that time. I don't know. But I think we overcomplicate things with the Bengals. They're cheap. They're poor. Joe Burrow's never ready in September because he's always hurt. This team's not hard to figure out. There's a reason for everything. They're so easy to figure out. Justin Kinner, 1410 ESPN Radio. Step away for a few moments. Ohio State, speaking of Ryan Day, Doug Toby, let's talk Ryan Day. Ryan Day got a nice little raise today and got a nice little extension, something that, we've talked a lot about with the Bengals side today with their players. But nonetheless, we'll talk about the Ohio State Buckeyes on the other side, plus big trade in the NBA. The Cleveland Cavaliers solidify themselves as a legitimate national NBA championship contender. We'll get to all that, too, coming up. Don't go anywhere. All right, and we are back. I do want to apologize. Apparently our phone lines are acting up at this exact moment. Just to be sure here, I do want to see something right here real quick. 937.
No one is currently
Yes,
available.
you guys are correct. Right now, we had 2 people on hold. They are gone, and now no one can call back in. So we are getting our engineer on that. I do apologize. Yes, I would like you guys to be able to call in on this particular hand. I appreciate the Bengals fans who are weighing in the chat. So if you head to the Justin Kinner Show Facebook page, you could watch the show there and interact with me in the chat, because when you leave your opinions there, I could pull them into the show and respond that way. Just talking today about, well, for a lot, Joe Burrow been very active. I do think it's cool what Joe Burrow has been doing. I think it's a good thing to be a leader of a team. Look, I kept saying this. One take that I had that was really driving people nuts was about Joey Votto back in the day, where I felt Joey Votto just didn't have that super competitive drive to win. And that may sound absolutely insane, but can't you see the urgency in Joe Burrow right now? This is what I love about Joe Burrow. I will give him this. There's urgency with Joe Burrow heading into year 6. He is going and doing all these media tours, and he is pleading with his front office to make championship moves because he knows his legacy's on the line. The MVP is going to be announced tonight. Lamar Jackson, the quarterback in his division, is either about to win his 3rd MVP, or Josh Allen, another QB rival that he is grouped in with, is going to add some hardware for the first time to his shelf. And then now you have Josh Allen with an MVP, Lamar Jackson with 2 MVPs, and Patrick Mahomes with all these Super Bowls and MVPs as well. And then there's Joe Burrow, who has a Super Bowl appearance that he lost. Joe Burrow feels the urgency there to put the pressure on the front office to get this done. And I always complained about Joey Votto never really truly feeling urgency to win and compete in Cincinnati. He got paid. He'd show up to the ballpark, he would do his job, and he'd go home. The Reds went through multiple rebuild phases during the Joey Votto era. We talked about the fact that they had the playoff appearances early in the Joey Votto era, and then, of course, it just went downhill quickly from there. There was no urgency on Joey Votto and to ever be a part of a contender in Cincinnati. You just never truly felt it. He would bail out the front office and say things like, man, I want to end my career in Cincinnati. I absolutely love it here. And he would say that coming off of a 94-loss season. Not that I want you to not want to be in Cincinnati, but I want you to at least kind of increase the urgency and the pressure on the front office, so that they're worried about, man, do you think at any point that the front office of the Cincinnati Reds felt like, oh man, we better figure something out. We might upset our franchise player? No, he let them off the hook. Joe Burrow, I promise you this, the Bengals may not technically do everything that he wants, but they're feeling pressure by Joe Burrow. Man, we got to be careful. What if we upset our franchise player? That complaint is valid. Nolan Russell, what up, Nolan? I hope you are doing well. Nolan says, I am very glad that Burrow put some heat on the front office. I love what he's doing. I think that a lot of players should do this. I love that Myles Garrett is doing it to Cleveland. Myles Garrett most likely is done in Cleveland. Everyone's burying Myles Garrett. I'm actually happy with what Myles Garrett is doing because Myles Garrett has had enough. We as fans have all had enough. When players have enough, we get mad at the players when I'm like, I don't blame you for having enough. I don't blame Myles Garrett for being fed up. But every time Myles Garrett would come out and say, man, I love it in Cleveland. I want to retire a Cleveland Brown, blah, blah, blah. That's letting the front office off the hook because the front office has just been making so many bad decisions, but they don't face any pressure of upsetting their star players because everyone keeps coming back. Myles Garrett has said no more. So what's going to happen is he's either going to be traded out of Cleveland or Cleveland is all of a sudden going to make some drastic important decisions to put them in position to win this upcoming season. And that's going to be because of the leadership of Myles Garrett. And if Myles Garrett is not here next year, it's not because he was a bad leader. It's because he had enough. And we all can relate to that as fans. When our team is not doing good by us, that's so frustrating. Myles Garrett's being a good leader. Joe Burrow's being a good leader right now. Well, the Bengals listen. That's the big thing coming up. So the other thing we were talking about, so Ryan, what up, Ryan? Ryan says maybe Pac-T and a couple of picks and draft Carter. Talking about Abdul Carter being aggressive, moving up in the draft. I said this about the Bengals earlier. They are just not an aggressive franchise. They don't make aggressive moves. They're not aggressive in free agency. They're not aggressive. They don't make moves at the trade deadline. They're not aggressive at the draft. They don't, if they have a guy that they really want, they're not exploring options to move up in the draft to get their guy. They just kind of, well, we liked him, but if he's there when we're up, fine. But if not, no big deal. Like they're just not, they are very just kind of franchise. They don't, nothing really moves the needle for them. Joe Burrow's different though. He is trying to change that. Will it work? That's what we're about to find out. Then we got to the Zach Taylor discussion, and I was frustrated because someone said, well, Joe Burrow, unlike Josh Allen and Lamar Jackson, he has to overcome bad coaching. He has to overcome Zach Taylor. And I'm like, Zach Taylor is a play caller for an offense that put Joe Burrow in position to throw for 4,800 yards and 40 touchdowns and put up what were historic offensive numbers. Tell me more about this horrific play calling that Joe Burrow is having to overcome. I mean, what are we doing? And then I defended Zach Taylor because people keep putting all the blame on him for the slow September starts. And I'm like, the Bengals aren't a hard team to figure out. They're a pretty easy team to figure out. Okay. They're very easy to figure out. We know how non-aggressive they are. We know how they're not a very rich franchise. You know what I mean? They're not going to, restructure contracts. We know that they're not going to make big trades. They're not going to trade up in the draft. We know this about them. Okay. So knowing all of that, I look at this Cincinnati Bengals team, and I don't think that they're doing anything wrong in the offseason that is leading to these slow starts. They are very easy to figure out. And when you really strip it down to this, it's pretty simple. Man, what could the Bengals do to get off to a better start in September? I think what we need to do is do something that you guys are afraid to do, and that's to blame Joe Burrow. I think it's up to Joe Burrow to make sure that this team is ready to play in September, and here's why. Have you ever noticed the coincidence of when Joe Burrow starts playing well, the Bengals play well? You ever notice Joe Burrow doesn't play well in the month of September? You mean to tell me that the coach that you all say is bad plays such a pivotal role in getting Joe Burrow ready to play? That Zach Taylor's slow start to coaching in September is, it's up to Zach Taylor to get Joe Burrow ready to play at the beginning. No, Joe Burrow is a professional quarterback. It's up to Joe Burrow to be ready to play in September. When Joe Burrow plays well, the Bengals play well. It's as simple as that. Zach Taylor's not doing anything different in October and November than what he is doing in September. The only one that is playing different in November, December, and on is Joe Burrow. Joe Burrow gets better as the season goes on. The Bengals go as Joe Burrow goes. Blaming Zach Taylor for these slow starts is ridiculous. Now, he will be the one that has his head chopped off when it's all said and done. He will be fired. That's how this works. But man, oh man, I think it's as simple as this. And it sounds, I'm blaming Joe Burrow, but at the same time, I'm just giving you the reason. Joe Burrow, this past offseason, this was the first full offseason or the first full preseason that he went through. He went through all of camp and everything. That was the first full camp he'd experienced. We're heading into year 6. He's had one full camp. Gee, why are they off to such slow starts every single year? He is always rehabbing or nursing some kind of injury in the offseason. His rookie year, no camp because of COVID. All right, heading into his sophomore year, his second year in the NFL, he was coming off the season-ending injury after the Week 11, leg injury. He was rehabbing that. Wasn't ready to go during that preseason. Took a while for him to get comfortable and going. Right? And then you have the appendectomy. And then you have the calf injury. And then this year, you have the surgery. He was still rehabbing that wrist coming into this season. Guys, it's not that hard. Every year the Bengals have a slow start. It's because your quarterback is not prepared to play in September. It's not that difficult. It's not Zach Taylor. It's not, maybe we should set our alarm for 7 a.m. instead of 8 a.m. Maybe we should have oatmeal for breakfast instead of scrambled eggs for breakfast. Maybe we should go to church at night instead of in the morning. Maybe, what do we do? Maybe we should have boxers or briefs. I don't know. It's not that hard. There is nothing that Zach Taylor is doing that doesn't have this team prepared to play in September. It is as simple as this. Joe Burrow was paid $55 million a season to elevate this franchise, and he has to be healthy. He has to be ready to go. Your best ability is your availability, and he's just not available when they need him the most every single season. You could say, well, it's not his fault. He's injured. It doesn't take away the fact that he's still not available when the team needs him the most to start the season. They didn't miss the playoffs. because of a bad call against the Kansas City Chiefs. They lost, and they missed the playoffs because they weren't ready to go in week 1 because Joe Burrow was still rehabbing and getting used to that wrist. Simple as that. It's not hard to figure out. Stop blaming Zach Taylor for all that nonsense. Matt Fink, what up, Matt? Matt says, us Bengals fans are so quick to give Burrow credit for any success and give Taylor all of the blame when things are going bad. Sometimes it's the other way around. I think it comes from insecurity as fans. Taylor got us to the Super Bowl. I will always be a fan. I don't like I said, I don't think Zach Taylor is, Andy Reid by any means. But I think if you start making a list of the problems with this Bengals team, he doesn't even crack the top 5. And it's ridiculous for anyone to say so. But to act like Joe Burrow is having to overcome Zach Taylor, unless you are naming his wrist Zach Taylor, unless you are naming his calf Zach Taylor, his ACL Zach Taylor, his appendectomy Zach Taylor, the only thing he's had to overcome are injuries because he's always injured. And this past year, he may have had a great year. He played in every single game. He was still nursing an injury coming into the season. And good for him for getting healthy and staying healthy the full season. But I'm just saying, it's not hard to figure out. Now, this upcoming season, Joe Burrow's completely healthy, and they get off to a slow start, then Zach Taylor's head will roll. But if Joe Burrow gets hurt again and is rehabbing an injury heading into week 1, you might as well just chalk it up to a loss and chalk up a bad September until he gets comfortable playing again. We've seen this movie every single season. What up, Matt? Hope you're well. Matt says, Justin, you are right. T needs to go so the Bengals have the opportunity to fix the defense. Yes, I'm very surprised that so many people are not truly comprehending what the Bengals need to do this offseason. Do you think of it like this? If the Bengals are going to extend Jamar Chase, he's going to get his $40 million. T Higgins, if they give him his deal, let's just say it's 25 to 30. Let's just say 30. Because he's going to get 30 somewhere. And if Joe Burrow is so adamant about him getting what he's worth, why would he take less than what he's worth? So it's 30. So that's $70 million will be given out just to those 2 players alone. Trey Hendrickson, 20 to 25 in that range. So now $100 million the Bengals are going to spend just on those 3 alone. So now what you have done is you've spent all this money to bring back the best players from last year. And the team missed the playoffs last year. Maybe not because of them, of course. But if you are saying that the secret to success is having all of those guys here, those guys were all here last year and they missed the playoffs. The key to the success of the Cincinnati Bengals are guys that aren't currently on this roster right now. And T Higgins, the money that you can, the 25 mil, the 30 mil that it's going to cost to keep him, $30 million over a couple of solid defensive players in free agency. That's the difference between a 9-win team missing the playoffs by 1 game and potentially either winning your division and making the playoffs. That's it. We'll see what ends up happening, but we've spent a lot of time on that. But Joe Burrow's media tours today, good for him. I do like when players do that. I think it's important. I'm comparing it to Myles Garrett. Myles Garrett is putting his team's feet to the fire. Myles Garrett's going to leave Cleveland. At some point, there's a good chance it's going to happen. But good for Myles Garrett for calling out the front office and saying, guys, what are we doing? You swung for the fences with Deshaun Watson. You missed. But continuing to lean into that's not good for the fans or the franchise. So what are we going to do to fix this? Myles Garrett is putting the pressure on the organization. They're not telling him the answers he likes. He wants to get the hell out. Good for him. I don't blame him, and Browns fans shouldn't either. And Joe Burrow, I don't blame him whatsoever for trying to increase the pressure on the front office to do the right thing, and that's take care of the guys that help put them in position to succeed every year. I may not agree with bringing T. Higgins back, but I respect the hell out of Joe Burrow going to bat for his guy. Justin Kinner Show, 1410 ESPN Radio. Ohio State Buckeyes extend Ryan Day for 7 years. 7-year extension, making him the highest or second highest paid college coach, or second highest paid football coach in college, of course. Kirby Smart, only coach making more than Ryan Day, of course, and Ryan Day surpasses Dabo Swinney, who was making the second most at that time. Of course, coming off a national championship like that, good for him, good for the Buckeyes. Moving forward, it will be nice. We were talking about Zach Taylor earlier with the Bengals. It's like, if the Bengals ever do pull off that Super Bowl run with Zach Taylor as their head coach again, I think like Zach Taylor is very similar. It has a very similar vibe to the Ryan Day run in Columbus. Like Ryan Day is going to be beloved now moving forward. It's just as simple as that. Won a championship. And that comes with it. Zach Taylor's going to get all the blame in Cincinnati, but if they win the Super, actually probably not. They're going to, you guys will probably find a way to discredit Zach Taylor like you always do. But I think blaming Zach Taylor for the Bengals' shortcomings is about as ridiculous as, when Ohio State was blaming Ryan Day. Now, I was one of those people who were critical of Ryan Day, but there's a difference. That's the thing too. People need to stop always associating criticism with oh man, you were critical of him. You wanted him fired. I was critical of him. Didn't say I want him fired. I said, we talked about what Ryan Day needed to do. Ryan Day needs to beat Michigan. Ryan Day needs to beat national championship contenders. Ryan Day needs to consistently win big games. Talked about that. That's fair criticism. And that was all warranted. Everyone out there who keeps doing this thing of, man, I bet all those people who were critical of Ryan Day, I bet you feel silly now. No, if anything, it just proved all of our point. Why couldn't you do this sooner? We never said he wasn't capable of doing it. We just said he's never done it to this point. Why should we trust that he can? I just find it very funny that everyone out there is doing this victory lap when I think everyone was bearing Ryan Day, and I think that it was fair. There's always the people that go a step too far, but I think every one of you out there who doubted Ohio State because of Ryan Day, that was me, that was a fair takeaway. But good for the Buckeyes for securing that. Something else that they did too, promoting Brian Hartline, not just offensive coordinator. He's been the offensive coordinator. He was co-offensive coordinator along with Chip Kelly. But the one thing that is different now is the fact that Brian Hartline will now be calling the plays moving forward. And I think that's a very interesting wrinkle to this. I will tell you, I'm a little concerned. Ohio State does open up the season against Texas. Texas is going to be one of the highest rated teams in football next year right off the bat. And his very first game ever calling plays is not going to be against Akron or Miami of Ohio. It's going to be against a real challenge in Texas. Man, oh man, that's baptism by fire right there. You don't get those buffer games like you usually get from time to time. They didn't play their first real team until October 12th last year when they played Oregon. But they're going to kick off the season against Texas. So I'm a little concerned about that. But at the same time, I have not been by the way, I'm a Brian Hartline guy. I just think sometimes the guy gets too much credit for stuff. I think Brian Hartline is an excellent wide receivers coach. I don't even think that's up for debate. I just don't know how much stock I put into this idea that there's no way Ohio State would get these wide receivers if it wasn't for Brian Hartline. I think the reason these receivers come to Ohio State has been because of the offense, Ryan Day's offense. I think that having a great communicator and teacher as a wide receiver coach has helped elevate Brian Hartline, but I'm not 100% convinced that Brian Hartline is the only reason that we get all these top wide receivers. I think the top wide receivers out there in that these schools are recruiting saw the quarterback trail that was coming out of Columbus. I mean, they've had one bad quarterback in the Ryan Day era, and the bad quarterback, Kyle McCord, put up better statistical numbers than Will Howard did this year, and Will Howard just won a national championship. But when you look at the Dwayne Haskins, when you look at the CJ Stroud, when you look at the Dwayne Haskins to Justin Fields to CJ Stroud and Will Howard, and you look at what he did, especially at the peak of this run, I think when it's the quarterback play along with the offense that is very wide receiver friendly, obviously. And I think right now Brian Hartline, took advantage of that. He's a very good recruiter. Don't get me wrong. I just think that, it'd be silly to think that Ohio State would not be as dominant recruiting wide receivers if it wasn't for Brian Hartline. I think a lot of it has to do with the offense. You looked at the fact that, Jim Tressel ball, was a very methodical, you know what I mean? Just kind of a methodical, conservative attack. Wasn't wide receiver friendly. They had good, notable wide receivers throughout the Tressel era, but wide receivers weren't lining up to go play in that offense. Urban Meyer loved fast, athletic wide receivers. Receivers weren't lining up to go play in Columbus for Urban Meyer because of the RPO system. It wasn't like it was a pass-friendly offense. Ryan Day takes over. All of a sudden, it's a completely different animal from the offensive play calling standpoint and the offensive scheme. And that became, I just think it lined up perfectly with the Zach Smith drama that led to Urban's departure. There was Brian Hartline. An opportunity fell right in his lap. But I think it has way more to do. I think Ryan Day does not get enough credit for that. I've said this before. I've never understood how anytime Alabama would land a big-time recruit, running back, even a kicker, even a receiver, defensive back, it didn't matter. We didn't hear, man, that position coach is killing it in Alabama. No, it's Nick Saban gets another one. But every time an elite wide receiver would come to Ohio State, that's the one thing Ohio State did under the Ryan Day era, has elevated the caliber of wide receiver that they get. I think a lot of that has to do with the offense. If Brian Hartline was the wide receivers coach during the Urban Meyer era, Brian Hartline would get very, very good wide receivers. I don't think the same caliber of receivers are coming through Columbus if it's Urban Meyer's system. And I'm not saying that Urban Meyer is bad. I'm saying that it was just a different kind of attack and recruiting thing for Urban Meyer. Receivers want to play in this offense. This offense puts quarterbacks in Heisman conversations, which if you have a quarterback in a Heisman conversation, that means there's been a lot of balls thrown around, a lot of opportunities for wide receiver. I'm sorry. I'm just defending Ryan Day a little bit more on this one. I think that Brian Hartline gets a little too much credit for the wide receiver success at Ohio State. He plays a major role in that. He's the wide receiver coach. Don't get me wrong. But do you think if Brian Hartline was the wide receiver coach during Tressel Ball and during Urban's, with Urban's offensive scheme, do you think that those same receivers are lining up to come play in Columbus? You'd be lying if you said yes. You'd be lying if you said yes. So, but I am happy for Brian Hartline getting the play calling responsibilities, because what Ohio State was doing is they kept giving him a raise and they would give him a different title. He was wide receivers coach, but hey, a couple years ago, they threw the offensive coordinator tag at him because they didn't want other schools coming around and poaching him away. But then they bring in Chip Kelly to be the real offensive coordinator, and that's who Chip Kelly was. Chip Kelly was the real offensive coordinator last year. Now Chip Kelly's gone, and now here we are with Brian Hartline, and it's sink or swim. You can't keep, he's being propped up. He's being talked about how great of a coach he is, and I'm sure that he is. I'm not doubting that, but now it's time for him to go prove it. It's a huge opportunity for Brian Hartline, because if he succeeds, and I'm pretty sure he will, he's going to be a head coach very, very soon. Very, very soon. I'm not anti, like I said, Brian Hartline. I'm just sharing with you. I think the guy gets a little bit too much credit for something that I think Ryan Day brought more to the table than he did. That's all. But that's a big deal. We'll be keeping an eye on that. And I'm telling you, give Ohio State credit too. They've been very patient filling out this coaching staff. They've been very patient. One thing that they have not done yet is fill the void at defensive coordinator. And there's still a part of me deep down that truly believes Luke Fickell is going to be that guy. There has been nothing reported on that. There are no leaks of any of that stuff. But keep in mind, when the announcement of Chip Kelly leaving UCLA to take the OC position at Ohio State happened, that took everybody by surprise. And I think the same thing could potentially happen with Luke Fickell. I like Luke Fickell. I've never been the biggest Luke Fickell guy, but I like Luke Fickell. But I don't think he's doing a great job at Wisconsin. I think that was the wrong job to leave Cincinnati for. He's not recruiting well. The portal's not doing well for him. They haven't won a lot of games during his tenure there, and the future looks bleak for the immediate future for this upcoming season looks bleak. So I think a couple years in, I think everyone's going to realize Luke Fickell in Wisconsin's not working out. He has a chance to go resurrect his career in Columbus. I think the reason it's taken so long to draw out is because this one takes time, and I think that it's going to be a very important hire. I will say, I think it has to be an experienced defensive coordinator that gets this role. Obviously, on the offensive coordinator side, you go and Brian Hartline. He's been the coordinator for a few years, but this is the first time he's a first-time play caller. He's going to be a first-time play caller going up against a Texas defense that is a veteran-led defense in week 1 next year with a lot of NFL talent on it. He's being thrown into the fire. What you cannot have is a first-year defensive coordinator also running the defense that's going up against a very experienced offense for the Texas Longhorns in week 1. I think it's going to be a former head coach or a current head coach that is going to be coming down that brings a lot of power with him. And I think that's going to be Luke Fickell when it's all said and done. It's the Justin Kinner Show right here on 1410 ESPN Radio. I apologize about the phone lines being down. We're trying to get that fixed. As soon as I get the green light, I will pass that on to you guys and let you know as far as that's concerned. Big trade in the NBA. The Cleveland Cavaliers are NBA title contenders. I'm buying in. I think the Cavaliers can actually do this after the trade that they made today. We'll talk about that when we come back.
Some people just know there's a better way to do things, like
the Justin Kinner Show right here on 1410 ESPN Radio. Don't forget, Valentine's Day is coming up just around the corner, and thanks to our friends and thanks to the Flower Man, we are giving away, a dozen roses, multiple bouquets of a dozen roses. So keep in mind a chance to win a dozen roses from the Flower Man for your significant other this Valentine's Day. No excuse to forget. Head to wingam.com and enter for your chance. We'll be drawing winners next week, but appreciate the Flower Man providing those for our listeners. So head to wingam.com and register for a free dozen roses that you can use for your significant other this Valentine's Day. So wingam.com. All you got to do is just register at the site. It's free. Takes a little time and be on your way. But shout out to our friends over at the Flower Man. Okay. The Justin Kinner Show Facebook page. Again, we can't take calls. The phone lines are down at the moment, trying to get that figured out. David Shaw says, I believe we're talking a lot of Bengals today. David Shaw says, I believe I brought up last year that the Bengals should trade T for draft picks so they could have used those on a wide receiver and save money to be used on the defensive side of the ball. And look where they are now. Yeah, like I said, I'm repeating myself a lot. I think I can't get on board with bringing T. Higgins back. And it's not because of T. Higgins. It's because of the price tag. And that's what people keep bringing up. Well, Joe Burrow, he needs T. Higgins. Oh, but the front office needs that $30 million. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know, man. Like, I don't, you have Jamar Chase. He's the best receiver in football. You can't convince me you need T. Higgins. You just don't. I heard Hushmanzada the other day on a media hit saying, well, if you take T. Higgins off this roster, who are you going to throw to? Stop being dramatic. Go get a wide receiver in free agency. And then here's the counter to that. Well, if you're going to go get someone in free agency, why not just pay T? Because you're not going to go find someone in free agency to spend $30 million on. You can get good quality pass catchers for half that price. And then you can use the remaining funds to go address an issue and a deficiency on the defensive side of the ball. This really isn't that hard. You are wanting a team that is cheap to begin with to put $70 million into two wide receivers and then expect that same team to then be smart enough when you take the $70 million that those two receivers would make and add that along with the $55 million that Joe Burrow makes. Now you want that front office. So what's the cap? About 240, 250? Subtract the $120 million from that is going to just those three players alone. You expect a front office? All right, you expect that front office to then create an entire roster with the remaining $100 million when they couldn't get it done with all of these players on these rookie deals for the last 5 years? You have faith that that could be done? It doesn't make sense to me. It does not make sense to me when it's all said and done. I will never be on board with the T. Higgins thing. I think that would be financially irresponsible to lean into that. Joe Burrow is doing his thing all day. That's all people have been talking about. I get it. He should do that. But again, Joe Burrow, it's not his money to spend. He got his. So there you go. We'll talk more about that coming up in a bit. Ron says Washington put 3 receivers in the draft last year. All of them had very productive seasons. Yeah, look, I mean, like I said, you get rid of T. Higgins, it's like, well, who else are you going to get that production from? Well, that guy's not on the roster. You either draft a receiver with your number 17 pick, or you go, again, I'd have to go look to see who the free agents are, or, do what every other professional football team does and orchestrate a trade, do something to get a cheaper option there, when it's all said and done. Doug Toby says, either way, the Bengals are in pretty good shape. Lose Higgins, add free agent defense. Keep Higgins, scored 30 a game. Hopefully Burrow is healthy. I mean, you say either way, the Bengals are in pretty good shape. The Bengals were putting up 30-plus points a game this year, and they missed the playoffs. It's all about defense. Look at the two teams this coming up weekend. We're going to talk a lot about Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce. We're going to talk a lot about Saquon Barkley and the Eagles. But when you strip that away, you know what these two teams actually are? Two of the most dominating defenses in the National Football League. And guess what? When Joe Burrow was healthy last year, they were putting up a lot of points and they were looking like the sky's the limit. But their defense stunk. They weren't going to do anything last year. Look who was in the Super Bowl last year. People talked about Christian McCaffrey and Deebo Samuel. People talked about, again, Patrick Mahomes and Travis Kelce. But it was about the two of the most dominating defenses in the National Football League. It's about the defense. The Bengals aren't in good shape. If you have Jamar Chase and T. Higgins and Joe Burrow and $120 million wrapped into those three with the bad offensive line, one of the worst run games in football, and a defense that looks like Swiss cheese with all the holes in it, I don't know how you can convince me or yourself that the Bengals are good either way. If the Bengals have to take a step back offensively, take a hit offensively, heaven forbid Joe Burrow throw for 4,400 yards instead of 4,800 yards. I just think that at the end of the day, Joe Burrow's numbers were as inflated as what they were because they were trailing in every game, so he had to throw a lot. He threw the ball 20 or 30 more times than anyone else in the NFL. So, of course, he had more yards than everybody else in the NFL. All right. They don't run the football because they never had the lead to try to kill the clock. So there was that aspect to it. And on top of that, they don't have a good run game to begin with. So you can't run the football. You're always trailing in games. Your only option offensively is to throw the football. So that's what he did. He put up big numbers because those were the only numbers to be had. But for the Bengals, less Joe equals more success for the Bengals. Less of Joe Burrow's arm is better for the Bengals. Less explosion on offense, actually, as wild as that sounds, means more explosion on defense, and that's how they're really going to turn things around. The Ravens, by the way, had a very roller coaster start to the season. They had one of the worst defenses in the NFL until about the week 7, week 8 range. You know what the Ravens finished with? A top 10 defense in the NFL, and look what they did. They go and take care of business and win the division. Like, at the end of the day, that's really what this comes down to. Defense, and more defense. So I'm not a fan of the idea of bringing up that the Bengals are in good shape no matter what. I disagree. They may be more fun to watch for you as a fan, putting up 30 points, but how fun is it as a fan not watching your team in the playoffs? It's not very fun. But Doug Toby goes on to say, hopefully Burrow is healthy at the beginning of the year and our new coaches can develop these young players. That I agree with you with. I think we make a lot about the slow starts to recap that from earlier in the show. I don't think it's anything Zach Taylor or the coaching staff's doing wrong. It honestly is. Joe Burrow has constantly been nursing an injury during every preseason his entire career. I don't think it's hard to figure out, what do they have to do to stop these slow starts? It's just as simple as hopefully Joe Burrow can have a healthy offseason, not be nursing an injury, not be recovering from some offseason surgery, not have an appendectomy right as camp gets underway. Joe Burrow is always nursing some injury heading into week 1 or having to kind of get comfortable again playing after missing so much time due to an injury or surgery the offseason or the season before. Joe Burrow's just healthy. I think the team's fine. They'll get out. If Joe Burrow didn't have that injury last year, he has this entire camp and they hit the ground running. They beat the Patriots. They win 11, 12 games and they're in the playoffs and, making some noise there. I don't know. David Shaw says, what helps slow starts? Not fumbling at the 1 yard line. I completely get that, but that offense was just completely inept that entire day. Joe Burrow was not himself. Joe Burrow is never himself in September. Joe Burrow needs to be himself. You get $55 million a year for 17 games in the regular season and postseason, not 13 regular season games. It's just, yeah. Ron Howard says the Browns had a top defense. What happened? No offense. This past year, look, they picked number 2 for a reason. The Browns stink. But at the end of the day, Cleveland 2 years ago, 5 different quarterbacks, they make the playoffs because of defense. The Cincinnati Bengals, they have to stop pretending that they're a Big 12 football team and start realizing that defense wins championships. The Kansas City Chiefs, they thought that they were always going to be the greatest show on turf. Remember, they looked like the Rams back in the day with Tyreek Hill and Travis Kelce and the way they ran the football and everything. They were just amazing, right? This offense for the Chiefs is boring now, but it's the most effective Chiefs team throughout its existence, and they're about to potentially three-peat on Sunday because they said, you know what, rather than give Tyreek Hill $30 million, We're going to use that money to disperse it throughout the roster and become a balanced football team. And that's what the Bengals have to do. I'm sure it wasn't ideal for Patrick Mahomes to lose Tyreek Hill. But Justin, he has Travis Kelce. Yeah, that's great. Joe Burrow will still have Jamar Chase. I don't feel bad for Joe Burrow there. I just don't. All right, how about this, NBA fans? The Atlanta Hawks traded DeAndre Hunter to the Cleveland Cavaliers for Karis LeVert, George Niang, and 3 second-round picks earlier this afternoon. This was a trade that all Cavs fans were keeping an eye on throughout the day. They finally pulled the trigger. Man, look, LeBron, 7 years ago, LeBron James dumped Cleveland for the second time, going to the Lakers. It's kind of wild that he's been a Laker for that long. But now, 7 years later, the Cavaliers probably have the best roster in the NBA. I mean, this is insane what they have. I mean, Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, DeAndre Hunter, Evan Mobley, Jared Allen, that's your starting five. This is a team that is 41-10. They are a legitimate NBA championship contender, and they were that before adding Hunter. Hunter now gives them a 6'8" forward. They haven't had that. They've had that maybe a handful of times throughout their entire existence. They just haven't prioritized that for whatever reason. But you add that type of weapon to what has already been one of the most explosive teams in the NBA. They are built differently. The roster's built different than everybody else. They have an offense similar to the Golden State Warriors from years ago, of course, and that's one reason why they brought over their new head coach to bring some of that over from Golden State, of course. But getting that two-way wing player is what they desperately needed, and man, oh man, look out for Cleveland in the second half. I think that kind of gives Cleveland sports fans a little bit of happiness considering all of the panic going on with the Cleveland Browns at the current moment. It's the Justin Kinner Show, 1410 ESPN Radio.